Hello Horror Hounds, welcome back to my A to Z of horror, and we are at M, halfway through already, with a film that claims to be based on a true story. Insert eye roll here. But I must admit I'd never heard of this particular legend or the cryptid it revolves around, nor the book by John A. Keel that the film was based upon. In fact, I'd never even heard of the film until I stumbled across it late one night on television by accident. Unless it wasn't by accident. Unless I was destined to cross paths with this film on that night. Because M is for the Mothman Prophecies. Here's where I tell you to go and check out Jambo Shango and Randy Mole's own A to Z of horror that inspired this one, and I'll provide a link down below to their entry for M, Madman. But for now, let's rock and roll with the reality-busting Mothman Prophecies. The legend of the Mothman purportedly springs from sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, of a moth-like humanoid with glowing red eyes, and sightings of it seem to presage disaster. In the film, Richard Gere stars as a Washington Post reporter named John Klein, who's happily married to Deborah Messing's character. But don't get used to her though, because inevitably, depressingly, the wife has to die to provide emotional grist for our main man's mill. She sees this creature, causing her to crash her car, leading to some brain scans and the discovery of an extremely rare form of brain tumour that takes her off the board in short order. But not before she fills a notebook with obsessive drawings of what she saw. An angel? A demon? Or the Mothman? 2 years later, and understandably still grieving, Klein enters the Twilight Zone, or a very low-key episode of The X-Files, where he finds himself in Point Pleasant, hundreds of miles away from where he should be. And that's when things start getting really weird. And it's this middle section of the film that really makes it worth recommending. I won't give away any plot points, but the build-up in this section of the film is excellent. For about 45 minutes, there's a really well-sustained atmosphere of creeping dread and growing weirdness that really worked its spell on me, having come across it late at night, alone, knowing absolutely nothing about the film before channel surfing brought me to it when it was starting. A few years before the Mothman Prophecies, director Mark Pellington had brought us Arlington Road, another film about a well-to-do, upper-middle-class, widowed American man falling down a mind-bending rabbit hole that not only shatters his nice, safe idea of normality, but threatens to either be all in his paranoid head or have him committed. Arlington Road was about pulling the threads behind the conspiracies of man-made disasters, domestic terrorism, whereas the Mothman Prophecies casts its net even wider and tackles the whole notion of a nice, safe reality, and whether we can or should try to avert more natural disasters, or whether such events are even natural as we understand it. The two films make a nice pair of bookends, both musing on similar themes from completely different trajectories. But if you really want a shiver, consider that these films also bookend the attacks of September the 11th, 2001 on the Pentagon, Twin Towers in New York, and other planes in America. The themes explored in both films seem weirdly, metatextually, inextricably tied up with those horrific, reality-shattering events. Where the build-up is brilliant, the payoff might let some down. While everything's building, the film is effective. However, trying to tie up a series of disparate encounters into some kind of conclusion is beyond the best efforts of the film. Focus shifts and whilst a few possibilities as to the nature of the Mothman are thrown into the mix, the titular creature is missing from the denouement of the film. A rather spectacular sequence, true, but a little prosaic for my liking, at the end of a film that was admirably reaching for a sense of the truly ineffable. Ultimately, the nature of the Mothman is so beyond our range of understanding, so nebulous, that you might as well answer any question the film throws up with, "Oh, a wizard did it." Until then, there's a solid section of the film that paddles extremely effectively in existential waters. Richard Gere plays his part with an understated sincerity that helps ground the more bizarre goings on and lets us in. His incredulity is our permission slip to suspend our disbelief. If you want to watch the film as a treatise on grief and loss, and how the loss of a loved one can completely invert what you thought about the world, then the Mothman Prophecies successfully meditates on that subject. If you want to dabble in the more Twilight Zone-like mysteries thrown up by this particular cryptozoological boogeyman, then the strangeness is built and sustained for the most part extremely well. Perhaps just not paid off in the way that David Lynch seems to effortlessly manage in affairs like The Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive. A reoccurrence of the letter Y or a Y-like symbol is peppered throughout this film. And as with other events in the narrative, interpretation is entirely up to you. Is it a sigil, a shape in the form of a winged creature in flight, a signifier of the influence of the Mothman? Does it represent a choice, two paths, or perhaps a point in time that's not fixed, where two outcomes are possible, allowing the Mothman to intervene? This recurring visual motif is one of an entire bag of tricks that Pellington uses to suggest viewpoints from outside our human perspective. If I were being mean, I would suggest that these tricks are employed to keep everything as kinetic as possible, so we don't have time to pause to question the sense or nonsense of what we're being told. But I'm not going to be mean about the Mothman Prophecies because I really like it. When it works, it really works, and when it fails, it's perhaps because its reach exceeds its grasp, which is an admirable reason to fail. Is it a film about grief and loss? It is if you want it to be. Is it about how we're hardwired to see patterns in a world that by its very nature is chaotic? It is if you want it to be. I think it's highly appropriate for a film asking those questions about human perception and understanding in a universe without answers, that some people will watch the Mothman Prophecies and see a hokey monster movie that doesn't really have a monster in it, whilst others will revel in a largely entertaining meditation on perhaps the greatest horror of all, that we may be adrift and alone in a cold universe that doesn't care for us. So we're entering the back end of the alphabet. I hope you're enjoying this series. I'm really having a blast doing it. So please join me next time when we reveal that N is for